Hoarding is potentially a big problem for landlords. It's something that perhaps has been more associated with social housing and social tenancies in the past. And hoarding can take a number of different forms, from the simple sort of building up of things from the supermarket on sale, non-perishables and the like, to piles of newspapers going back years, to collecting rubbish within individual rooms, or collecting perishable items and building up basically a big pile of smelly, moulding foodstuffs or whatever. So it can be a real issue, but something that's been found more in the social sector. And we've seen social landlords have to take quite drastic action, sometimes evicting tenants, sometimes quite elderly or vulnerable tenants. And it is something that is often associated with more vulnerable tenants and particularly potentially mental health issues. And it is on the increase within the private rented sector, partly as a result of the fact that more and more vulnerable tenants are being housed within private rented accommodation. And that's because there is a decline in the availability of social housing, the support available to within social work departments and social care is diminishing. The fact that social landlords are actually becoming a lot more commercial, a lot more savvy. They're behaving more and more like the media would have you believe private landlords are like. They're being tough with their tenants. They're putting their tenants through affordability tests. They are imposing quite harsh antisocial behaviour clauses on there. They are demanding references. So increasingly we're seeing a diminishing stock of social housing, and social housing providers being much tougher about the people they're prepared to accommodate. And that means that councils are relying more and more on the private rented sector to house people who previously would almost certainly have been in social housing and with the support services that come with that. And part of that is potentially issues with hoarding. It's difficult to know how to react to someone who's hoarding. At the end of the day, you've let them their property, it is their home, they have a right to quiet enjoyment, but at some point that hoarding may become either a nuisance, a danger, or a hazard. And at that point, a landlord really needs to act. Ideally, it's an issue you want to catch before it becomes a too big a problem. And this is where things like regular property inspections are important. So we would recommend that if you are giving out a tenancy of 6 months, you'll want to do perhaps a spot check at 2 months or 3 months. You will need your tenant's permission to enter the property, but you know, if you start to see signs of a build-up of items or rubbish or things that, you know, you perhaps see one or two of in a property but not 10 dozen, then maybe, you know, you might want to have a word with the tenant at that point. Of course, it's not necessarily a behaviour that a tenant will exhibit when they move in at first. It's something that can build up over time, or something that can maybe happen quite suddenly in terms of a traumatic event within their life, or a bereavement or a trigger point can lead to a change of behaviour. So you can have a long-term tenant who has been a great exemplary tenant who suddenly sees a change in behaviour, and that will build up over time. And in that circumstance, chances are that problem is going to build up without you seeing it, because if they've been a good long-term tenant, you'll feel less need to have to go in and check on the property. What can you do in those circumstances? Well, if the brutal solution, I guess, depending on the nature of the problem, is to serve notice on the tenant. If, for example, you've got piles of newspapers, which might be common, in an upstairs room that may put stress on the floor, particularly if in a flatted property with another property below, or if it's something that's going to leak or decompose, that then potentially becomes a health hazard. And then, if things are being piled up, then it's potentially a danger to the tenant themselves in terms of collapse and injury. So clearly, hoarding can lead to a number of issues. And you may want to look at taking eviction procedures against a tenant. It will really depend on the circumstances, how long it's gone on. and how well you know the tenant. It may well be that there are other, you want to try and deal with this in other ways. You could try involving the local authority, particularly if there is a health issue or a hazard or danger to life, and try and get environmental health involved to see if they will allow the property to be cleared. You could speak to the tenant themselves to see if they will allow you to clear the property as a one-off, and then you can continue to look at inspections. If it is a mental health issue, you may wish to involve the social services. Part of the problem here, of course, is that local authorities across the board and across the country are under huge strain, and we're seeing funding for environmental health, funding for enforcement, funding for mental health and support services cut. So chances are your local authority may not be able to help in terms of resource, and may not be willing to help. There's a real issue round about cost shifting today, particularly between the NHS and local authorities, and if someone takes responsibility for an issue, they're taking responsibility for the cost and resolving of that. And we've seen it as well in terms of homelessness, and the fact that councils are either bending over backwards to have someone declared intentionally homeless so they don't have to discharge their duty, or to try and move that duty onto another local authority. So we can see that the pressure that local authorities are under manifesting itself in a number of different ways, and when it comes to a severe case of hoarding where it is a health hazard, or where you think there may be mental health issues, then it may be that you really need to press hard to get that issue taken seriously and to get action taken. But ultimately, if it is creating a smell, if it is a danger either to neighbouring properties above, below, or neighbours, then you will need to take action as a landlord. Again, you may well be relying on a Section 8 here in terms of breach of tenancy, acting in an untenant-like manner, or you may simply wish to look at Section 21 to get certainty of possession. There are a number of things you can do in the interim. If you are considering the repossession route, then it might be an idea to initially write a warning letter to the tenant, letting them know that their tenancy may be under threat if the hoarding issue isn't sorted. Potentially, you could offer some support, as I say, like to help to clear the property, perhaps help with the cost of that. And I would copy that letter to the local authority, to the appropriate department, so they are aware that there is an issue here, there is a potential case of homelessness, and there is someone here who needs support and help. And you are being reasonable in the way you're dealing with it. It's an incredibly difficult situation. As I say, it's one that can have very serious consequences, both in terms of the health of your tenant or visitors to the property, or indeed for neighbours, and it is something that needs to be tackled as early as possible. In terms of other avenues you can maybe explore, if you do have next of kin details for a tenant, then clearly that would be helpful. It's much better if it's something that the family can help with. Again, it's an area where having a good relationship with the neighbours of your property can really help with. Neighbours will often have a good idea when there's problems in a property, not simply because you've got nosy neighbours, but they are interested and concerned, particularly if it begins to have an impact on them. So yeah, there's definitely a number of avenues there. Perhaps if there's a guarantor, you can speak to them and see if they're able to help, or use either family, neighbours, or the guarantor to approach the local authority or health services, rather than you as an unconnected person doing that.